Good morning. My name is Brian Bloom, and I'm here to talk about my view of value creation in the pharmaceutical industry. First, I'd like to talk to you about my background. I'm probably the only person here who doesn't work for a pharmaceutical company, but I do work for a healthcare company, and we're in the business of trying to value pharmaceutical companies. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. But first, I'll introduce my firm. Okay, so Burton is a healthcare company that specializes in accelerating monetization in healthcare. That effectively means we do our best to help create value for healthcare companies. We help identify extraordinary Canadian healthcare companies, and we connect those great healthcare companies in Canada with investors. We have 6 business units that all work together to help finance and move forward healthcare companies in Canada. We do capital raising, which means we find healthcare companies, of all stripes, whether they be biotechnology companies, pharmaceutical companies, medtech, healthcare, digital health companies, device companies, and consumer healthcare companies, and we help raise capital for them. Most of these companies are small and entrepreneurial. They're startup companies or they're emerging commercial companies, and we help finance them by taking them to market, by doing initial public offerings, private placements, equity and debt financings, and things of that nature. The second thing that we do is merger and acquisition advisory. So these are companies that are looking to grow by identifying other pieces of intellectual property, similarly sized companies, or they're looking to monetize themselves completely via a trade sale to multinationals. So we help auction off assets, catalog and find assets for companies, and that is our merger and acquisition business. And of course, that's a very active part of the growth of Canadian companies like Valiant and others, and Knight Therapeutics, and we're proud to play a role in those types of transactions. The third thing we do is a service to investors. So we have the #1 ranked equity research analyst team in Canada. We put buy and sell reports on publicly traded companies, and again, all of that is based on our view of the value of a company. Either a company is extraordinary but overvalued or undervalued, or a company is lacking in many ways and undervalued. And we share our views with investors through our written research. And again, all of that is based on our skills at valuing companies and assets, which I'll talk about in a moment. The fourth thing we do is consulting. We call it monetization planning, and it's our way to help companies catalog, identify, diligence, and create clinical and medical plans that can bring new assets to market. The fifth business that we do is direct investing. So even though we know all the Canadian companies and thousands of investors who look to us to find healthcare companies to invest in, we also have an equity fund and a small debt fund, and those funds help, we invest directly into companies, and we help grow those companies. And the sixth thing we do is company creation and incubation, which is more for really early stage companies. So all those things work together to help grow extraordinary healthcare companies in Canada. It's obvious to say that we have 2 customers. One are, most people like you in the audience, companies and organizations that are looking for advice and capital to grow. And the second customer of ours are investors who are looking for great companies to invest in. And of course, the goal of all investors and companies and organizations is to achieve some sort of monetizing event. A monetizing event to us, and I didn't really say this up front because I was just catching my breath, I'm just getting into the swing of things here. A monetizing event to us is anything that really creates value. It could be getting a drug to market, being able to go public on an exchange, being able to access capital, getting a co-promotion partnership or a license in a certain geography. All of those things are monetization events. And both companies and investors look to those, and we help companies get there faster. We're a highly qualified team. We're based in Toronto, and all of us, there's about 13 of us in the office, and every single one of us has a medical or a scientific or a pharmaceutical background. So we're not investment people who decided one day to do healthcare. I don't know why anyone would actually do that. We're actually healthcare people who decide to spend our lives in the investment world. We have a pretty detailed methodology that underpins all of our services, and I won't go into great detail, but effectively we do a very deep amount of diligence for all the companies and assets that we work with. We're comfortable with all different kinds of funding structures, whether they be equity or debt, or working with private companies or publicly traded companies. We are very comfortable doing cross-border deals, taking Canadian companies to the NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange, helping American companies list on the Toronto Exchange, or helping international investors or strategic investors like multinationals take strategic stakes in Canadian companies. We have great relationships with healthcare specialty investors. And number 5, we do engage everyone in the community. So in addition to just companies and investors, we're also very active with, sitting on advisory panels. I'm on the National Research Council of Canada and Biotech Canada. We're involved with PharmXD. We help companies, organizations like Mars, mentor and innovate the small companies. And we also hold the largest healthcare investor conference in Canada. So we do everything that we can to help make a better environment for healthcare companies to grow in Canada. And we're also, given that our names are on the door, we're a pretty small firm, which allows us, which affords us a lot of room to be creative and entrepreneurial in the way that we run our company. Our recent transactions, it's just, it illustrates what I've said. On this list, you'll see large transactions and small transactions. You'll see pharma and biotech and medtech, the wide range of healthcare. You'll see equity and debt. You'll see publicly traded companies and private companies. And you'll see buyers that are VCs, private equity firms, and the public markets. So that's me. I'm mainly the science guy, and I head up officially, I head up anything that faces an investor. I head up our research and sales group. So my fiduciary responsibility is to the investor, and my partner Jolyon, his fiduciary responsibility is to the company. Companies like, our client companies, whose boards and management teams look to him for advice on how to best grow. So, principles of value creation. I was thinking hard about what I was actually going to say to this audience, knowing that many people in this audience work for multinational companies. My understanding is a lot of you professionals are, you're in the sales and marketing function or the business development function. You're responsible for launching drugs in the Canadian jurisdiction and maximizing their value in Canada. But I wanted to sort of introduce concepts to you so that you know how investors think about valuing pharmaceutical companies. So I'm not going to do an economics 101. I'm sure there's lots of people here with MBAs who know way more about economics than I do. I'm a biochemist, so what do I know about economics? But in its simplest form, the value of any asset or a company is the sum of its current or future cash flow. And, that's true across all sectors and all situations. It sounds elementary, but it's important to define up front. Investors can be external or internal. And internal could be like your own headquarters in Switzerland or New Jersey who allocate capital, or your internal CEOs or CFOs or Canadian presidents of the Canadian division. These are the people that figure out what to do with the resources that they have. And investments can be in the form of money, or it could be in the form of infrastructure or resources that are not necessarily money. But all new projects need to be evaluated based on their worthiness. Are they worth investing in? And you have internal decision makers. They need to decide whether to use scarce resources for new product launches, for growth, expansion, doubling down the number of salespeople, in licensing something new. And those, internal investors are just as important as the second type of investors, which are external. And those are shareholders, people who put capital at risk to figure out whether they're going to, through ownership or through lending to usually a smaller entrepreneurial company, whether their capital will be used for new projects and growth. So even though most of our work is done with external investors, it's very important that you all know that internal, investors, which are the CFOs and the bean counters in your own company, to figure out whether a project is worthy and whether a new idea is worth supporting, their view of whether an asset has value or not is no different than that of an external investor. So both, all investors, whether internal or external, invest for the same reason. They're looking for a positive return on their capital, and they have to consider time, risk, and growth. In a very elementary, another very, very simple slide, but again, worth worth talking about. You know, the same amount of cash flow today is worth more than the same amount of cash flow in the future. And of course, the same amount of cash flow that's at a low risk or at a higher probability is worth more than the same cash flow stream that is at a higher risk or a lower probability. And finally, talking about growth, people pay more for growth than they do for things that are steady. All right, so, you know, there's lots of different models of how we create value in the healthcare industry. Interestingly, look at these four. All of them have merit, even though some have more green than others. The one on the left, you know, the top left, is an example of a company that has a product, you know, where they may be 100% of the market, but it may be a much, much smaller revenue stream. Maybe it has a much smaller infrastructure compared to the one on the right, which is more like the statin market, where the market overall is way bigger, but it may be declining, mature, and you may need a lot more marketing dollars to sort of duke it out amongst your competitors. Obviously, the bottom right is a launch company. It's a product that is just being prepared to be launched. And the one on the bottom right is my favorite, which is a fully R&D company who, in my opinion, sometimes has more value than all four of these, than the three others. You know, the bottom right would be a biotechnology company that does basic science, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials, where it's all red, but again, investors, based on all of these factors, need to figure out whether the future cash flow is large enough to justify the value of the company today. So, you know, there's lots of qualitative factors that investors, both internal but mainly external, and that we spend all of our day when we do our research thinking about how we value an R&D stage asset or a pharmaceutical asset that is at the launch phase or that's on the market. You know, it used to be in the 90s that if you just had a safe and effective drug, it had value, but that's obviously no longer true. In today's environment, with all the pressures on the healthcare system, commercial considerations like reimbursement and savings to the system, pharmacoeconomic analysis, that is just as important. And all the things, do I really have to wrap it up? And all the things on the left do inform the safety and efficacy and commercial considerations that we calculate and value when we are considering an external investment in a company. The final thing is that I was going to talk about are trends. I'll leave them up here. But basically, people are looking for products that sell themselves, products that aren't heavily dependent on marketing, products that are based on cutting-edge research and development, really moving the needle with respect to, clinical outcomes, a strong emphasis on data and evidence, and markets that have large needs and not necessarily convenience or me-too products. Both in the R&D and the commercial sense, those are the major trends in the investment space, and I thank you for your time.